and you are listening to By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Eugene Puryear, here with Sean Blackmon, and as always, we're your guide to connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
By any means necessary.
And we are very happy to be joined here by Arnold August, a Montreal-based writer, journalist, and lecturer, and the author of the recent book, Cuba U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. Mr. August, thank you so much for being with us again.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you.
Pleasure is all ours, and I wanted to talk here for a bit about the Venezuelan regional elections that took place this Sunday. Pretty substantial win here by the Chavista forces. 75% of the governorships won by them. 54% of the vote share there. Your just maybe top-line thoughts on how this all turned out.
Well, I think that was a major victory. The statistics that you just read out, they speak for themselves. But I think some listeners might say that, 61% turnout is not that high, but it's extremely high in the context of Venezuela, where abstention has a certain tradition there. And in any case, we could say on a world scale that it is very high turnout rate. And in the Venezuelan context, I would like to add that the elections last Sunday took place in extremely difficult conditions, whereby the pro-U.S. opposition forces in Venezuela carried out a large scale of violent activities, which created, to a certain extent, in many areas or some areas in Venezuela, an atmosphere of uncertainty, an atmosphere of threat. So despite that, the turnout was very, very high, and of course the result is fantastic. 54% of the votes went to the PSUV, the Chavista Socialist Party. It's a major breakthrough, and of course, winning those states that you just mentioned, 17 of 23 states is extremely good. I think that the one of the important things that I noticed was that, for example, the Hector Rodriguez won the state of Miranda. That was very significant, in my view, for several reasons. Firstly, that state was previously held by the opposition, namely the Henrique Capriles forces. So just that is a major blow against the opposition. And I would like to point out another thing, is that Hector Rodriguez represents, you could almost say, the next generation of Chavismo, which is very, very vibrant. I had an opportunity to meet him personally when I was in Caracas earlier this year in March 2017, and it really struck me, the charisma, the political consciousness, his sincerity, the deepness of his thoughts, how he communicated with us foreigners on that day. It shows the nature of Chavismo, that it is very strong. It has other generations coming up, even though, of course, Maduro is still very young, but still it's good to see this Chavismo, including a wide variety of ages, as well as gender, race, etc. And it was really happy. I was happy for all the governors who won, revolutionary governors who won, but that for Hector Rodriguez, for me, to respond to your question, it really hit a very sensitive chord in my thinking.
No, I think you make a great point there. Also, Amazonas State, which was a big opposition state, 60% vote collapse of the opposition. And I'm glad you raised that issue. Also, Lara State fell, which is another opposition stronghold, because it seems that the opposition strategy of the violent street protest in the past two votes, we've seen in some ways a strong reaction, I think, from the population on the opposition strategy. I mean, it just seems like there are many things to say about this vote, but in some ways it's kind of a vote of no confidence in what took place there with so many deaths and so much violence.
You're absolutely right. That's an important point. For example, you had this vote Sunday coming on the heels of a vote not too very long ago to establish the Constituent Assembly that was held in even more difficult conditions because the violence just was still taking place at the time, but the vote took place and it was held properly, and constituent assembly people were elected. Now, this one came right after. Now, if you take both of these results together, it indicates a very important victory for the Bolivarian Revolution. And I think a lot of people are saying the following, that, people are not speculating, analyzing correctly, that how come they were able to do it. And I think that, in my view, that the victory of Sunday was not just as a result of the campaigning and the struggle that took place in the month leading up to that vote, but that vote has its roots over the last few years, especially since or during the presidency of Hugo Chavez, but also after his death, where, in my view, the Bolivarian Revolution went through an important change. It went from basically participatory democracy to protagonist democracy. In my view, it's not quite the same. Some people may think it's the same, but I do not think so. Participatory democracy, looking at it from, in the discussions in Canada, United States, England, etc., participatory democracy has become sort of a buzzword that can be applied to any old system. They even use it to apply to the American system when some people gather around a congressperson running up for elections. But I think that Venezuela has gone beyond that to another step. In my view, protagonist democracy means that the people see themselves as part of the revolution. They see the Bolivarian Revolution as their revolution. I think this is a major difference between the two levels of democracy. And I think, in my view, the Bolivarian experience is a model for the entire world of this type of protagonist democracy, in which, as the word indicates, as the term indicates, the people see themselves as the authors, as the protagonists of their own revolution, of their future. I think that we have a very important lesson to learn for all over the world with regards to this experience in Venezuela.
Mr. August, what's been interesting for me to see is sort of the different forms that the opposition tends to take. I mean, we saw the violence in the streets, both with this election and the Constituent Assembly, as you mentioned, and that didn't really deter things to the level that I think they wanted. So now, of course, after this electoral victory for the PSUV, now the opposition is crying fraud. And although the Maduro government has expressed a willingness to work with the opposition governors that were elected, I don't know if that sort of cooperation is necessarily forthcoming. So it really seems that, the opposition is going to sort of continue down this same sort of strident line that it's been heading down. And I can't help but wonder if that might lead to more violence.
I think that they may want to try the violent approach inside the country as their main modus vivendi, their main way of operating is to try to create a pretext for American direct or indirect intervention in Venezuela on a so-called humanitarian basis, that there's problems there, that people are dying, and there's no, supposedly there's no nothing to eat, etc. But I don't think they could carry it out, because if they have some supporters doing this thing in alliance with the leadership, they must feel pretty much isolated now, because they were isolated in the weeks during the election campaign, and the results show that they really have no base at all. And I don't think, I may be wrong, because you never know with the United States behind them, I don't think they'll be able to mount any sustained violence in some of the states that they normally do because of what I just said. But of course, you never know. I may be wrong. The United States may very well go further in trying to encourage this, because they lost the elections last Sunday, and they're not willing to accept it. While some of the leadership said they will accept the elections, opposition leadership said they will accept the results, that the process was fair and clean before the results. But since the results, they have said there's something fishy, the usual thing, of course, and the results we cannot rely on the official results, etc. So this is nothing new. I would just say this whole tendency to deny by innuendo or overtly the actual results. This actually began after Maduro won the first elections following the death of Hugo Chavez a few years ago. Now, it was none other than President Obama and his administration that worked with the opposition at that time to create this scenario that the voting was not democratic. There's something fishy. There was fraud, and the current thing going on under the Trump administration, it is basically the same overall perspective that the United States is trying to push on.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, Mr. August. We're going to take a break here on By Any Means Necessary here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. Stay with us.